Good morning again. My name is Jo Decker. I'm the Vice President for Business Winning and Strategy at BAE Systems and President of AFCEA DC. On behalf of the Board of Directors of AFCEA Washington DC, I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today for our virtual webinar on Zero Trust. We have an excellent speaker lineup for you this afternoon. Before we begin today, I'd like to express my thanks to the AFCEA DC Board of Directors. Through their support, we are able to produce these virtual events and get the high caliber speakers you will see today. To all the board members in the audience today, thank you. A few housekeeping items for today's event. If you have questions for the panel, please use the chat feature to ask the moderator. Kevin Coleman, Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, will be addressing the audience questions throughout the panel. If you have technical concerns, please use the chat feature and we will assist as quickly as we can. Immediately following our panel discussion, we will have virtual networking. The link to join the networking session will be provided in the chat box prior to conclusion. I'd now like to introduce the host of today's event, James Hansen, Vice President and Publisher of NextGov, and the Vice President of Programs with AFCEA DC.
Thank you, Jo. And again, thank you everybody for your patience. I have a few housekeeping items. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly so that we can get to our panelists and why you are really joining us today. Obviously, we couldn't make this program happen without our sponsors. So I just want to personally thank them and feel free to throw some thank yous in the chat box to them as well because they're making this happen and their contributions are going to AFCEA DC's scholarship program that supports high school students pursuing careers in STEM. So it's really important and we appreciate it. So a thank you to our program sponsor, Hitachi Vantara Federal, our elite sponsor, NetScout and Immix Group, our premier sponsors, AT&T, Citrix, Comcast Business, CommScope, CrowdStrike, Duo Security, Fortinet, Informatica, Leidos, Lookout, Lumen, Micro Focus Government Solutions, NetApp, OpenText, Oracle, Red Hat, ServiceNow, Steel Cloud, Veritas, Verizon, Worldwide Technologies, Zscaler, and our small business sponsor, OROC Technologies, our community partner, National Cybersecurity Alliance, and our media sponsors, Signal Magazine, Defense One, NetScout, and FedScoop, and our supporting sponsor, YesAnd Agency. I won't do that every month, so hopefully you guys will be coming back month over month, but given our second one, and we had a number of new companies join us this month for the year, and I just want to express my gratitude to them. I'd also like to quickly thank our program committee that has been working hard over the summer and the fall to put this program together. A special thank you to Eric Oakes from Lumen Technologies and Sean Frazier from Duo Security, who were instrumental in shaping today's program. So thank you, Eric and Sean, again. You can thank them in the chat box as well. And then quickly, our next month is November 12th. We'll be hosting 5G, powering military smart bases. You don't want to miss that either. You can go to dc.afceachapters.org, but we already have representation from the Navy, Air Force, Army, and it's shaping up to be a phenomenal conversation. So please mark your calendar for November 12th and join us. Also, as you're looking towards the winter, you'll note, obviously, that we're not able to have our winter gala this year, but we are hosting a virtual Toys for Tots drive. Be on the lookout for more information on that. If you're posting on social channels today, follow along with @AFCEA DC. Share your thoughts, questions, feedback. Use hashtag A Common Defense and Zero Trust. And with that, hopefully I got through that quickly and you guys are ready. So I'd like to quickly introduce Gary Hicks, Chief Technology Officer at Hitachi Federal, to introduce our panel. Take it away, Gary.
Thank you, James. Hitachi Vantara Federal is an end-to-end data services provider focused on supporting our federal customers. We're an active member of AFCEA, and we thank you for hosting this great event today. The deployment of a zero trust architecture is something every agency should be working on. I'm now proud to introduce Chris Cleary, Chief Information Security Officer, Department of the Navy; Sean Connolly, Trusted Internet Connections Program Manager, CISA; Patrick Dedham, Deputy to the Commander, Senior Technical Director, Chief Engineer, Netcom; Brandon Iskey, Chief Engineer, Security Enablers Portfolio, ID2, DISA; Renata Spinks, Cyber Technology Officer, U.S. Marine Corps Forces Cyberspace Command. Moderating today's panel is Kelvin Coleman, Executive Director, National Cybersecurity Alliance.
Hey, Gary, thank you very much for that introduction. Joe, James, thank you as well. It's going to be really great to be with you today. My name is Kelvin Coleman. I'm the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. And to everyone out there, I'd like to say happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month as we celebrate every year in October. Do your part, be cyber smart. In that spirit, today we're going to talk about the road to zero trust. It's no secret that the DoD has the largest and most complex set of networks in the world. The DoD also has an increasing number of endpoint devices. So how does zero trust figure into that? Does it help? Does it hinder DoD's mission? And certainly the principle of never trust, always verify. We're going to be talking about that today with an esteemed group of folks, and I mean a really, really esteemed group of folks. So we're going to ask them to show themselves at this point, everyone. And we're going to have them introduce themselves and tell just a little bit about their background and where they're coming from. So Brandon, let's start with you. You want to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yeah, thank you, Kelvin. So I'm Brandon Iskey, and thank you again for the opportunity here to present today and share what we're doing within the Defense Information Systems Agency. So I'm the Chief Engineer for our Security Enablers portfolio within ID2 under the direction of Dr. Serena Chan in our Cyber Development Directorate. So from our perspective, we're working on developing and defining the Zero Trust reference architecture for the Department of Defense. And so that's aligned with the cybersecurity reference architecture. And so we're putting the finishing touches on that as we speak, and that will be distributed here later this fall.
Great, thank you, Brandon. Sean, let's go to you next.
Yeah, thank you, Kelvin, and thank you to Joe and James for the opportunity to speak. So I think I'm here representing the Federal Civilian Executive Branch. So I lead the Trusted Internet Connection Program at CISA. The TIC program, as it's called. TIC is on the civilian side, how agencies are moving forward with some of their strategies and architectures. OMB released a memo in September 2019, updating the TIC initiative. It's about 10 years old. And so CISA, with my agency, we've been working with agencies to help agencies understand this new strategy, the new architectures, the flexibility and visibility opportunities, and Zero Trust fits perfectly into that. And then my other hat is I also am one of the co-authors of NIST. They recently released the 800-207, the Zero Trust Architecture Special Pub. But my caveat, whenever I admit I co-authored that, the other authors, Scott, Oliver, Stu, they're the rock stars of that paper. I'm more the Ringo Starr of the group. So I'm honored that, but they're the real lead authors on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I mean, Ringo was in the group, so you still appreciate you. Renata, we're going to move to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. So I'm the Cyber Technology Officer for the Marine Corps. Work very closely with our naval partners as well as Cyber Command. So we're pretty much two hats. We have a focus on the mix-in, but also what we call the DODIN, which is the information environment, and all those joint capabilities that are necessary. And piggybacking off Brandon and the work that's going on at DISA from an architecture perspective, we have a pilot going on right now, partnering with Cyber Command about Zero Trust, and we're hoping to put that minimally viable product together for configuration from a cyber security perspective as we deploy multiple capabilities for the distributed workforce.
I think we'll probably hear a little bit more about that during today's panel, so I appreciate you teasing that up. And on your saying you work very closely with your partners in the Navy, Chris, going to go to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, good morning, everybody. And again, thanks, Calvin and to AFCEA for having me. So my name is Chris Cleary. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of the Navy. If you guys have been tracking sort of the re-establishment of the Don CIO office within the Department of the Navy, we've been at it for about a year now. I've been in the seat for about a year. I'm the first of its name, right? So when the Navy reconstituted this effort, they decided they should put a CISO at the department level, work very, very closely with the Marine Corps and the Navy, obviously, as the two sort of surrogate organizations that live underneath the Don. And Zero Trust is, we're really trying to get at it right now, predicated. I think we're going to talk a lot about how COVID has driven this and sort of the things that have gone into it. But, happy to be here, happy to be working with DISA, particularly taking DISA's lead on a lot of what the DISA is doing with the Zero Trust and Zero Trust architecture with Cybercom. So it's, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Last, certainly not least, Patrick, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hello, everybody, and thank you to AFCEA for having me. My name is Pat Dedham, and I'm the Deputy to the Commander of Network Enterprise Technology Command. We fall underneath Army Cyber, and our responsibility is to operate, maintain, and secure the Army's network globally. We have about 15,000 people working in NetCom, everywhere from Southwest Asia to Korea, to across the continental United States. We have 3 subordinate theater signal commands and 8 signal brigades that provide that operations, maintenance, and security for the network. And of course, one of our big tasks are to operate, maintain, and secure the networks on the 288 Army camps post stations around the world. Big change recently that you may not be aware of, the team here, is that Army Cyber used to run the Doden Operations Center for the Army. That's been brought down to NetCom. So now we run that 24/7, 365 Department of Defense Information Network Operations Center for the Army's network across the globe.
So you're getting a little tease, everyone, of just how exciting this panel is going to be. And let me remind you that you can submit questions at any point to any of the panelists. I will finally say that Michael Jordan, one of my favorite athletes and a fraternity brother of mine, once said, individuals win games, but teams win championships. As you can hear from the panelists and just what they've talked about here today, many of them work together on a daily basis. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm going to get out of the way and really get to the subject matter experts here. And Brandon, I'm going to give you the first question here. I'm not going to assume everyone in our audience really understands what Zero Trust is all about. So 2-part question for you. Just set the stage for us. What does Zero Trust mean? And talk to us about DISA and your role there in the Zero Trust architecture, which I know you have a prominent role in. Brandon.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kelvin. So again, from Zero Trust, from our perspective, is very much a journey and a change in mindset and culture. So this is actually, for us, a joint effort that we're working on with NSA under guidance from U.S. Cyber Command and DoD CIO. So really what NSA and DISA are doing is really defining the principles here. So a lot of this is built off of the NIST guidance, but also putting a reference architecture together, taking into consideration DoD enterprise services and capabilities and building upon those. So again, we're leveraging the same set of principles and guiding concepts that are very common here across the board. So that includes never trust, always verify, assume breach, and verify explicitly. And I put the spin on there as well as really moving from point-in-time authentication to continuous multi-factor authentication too. So from a DISA perspective, we've talked about assured identity and some of these other concepts in the mobility space. We're always building upon that and putting that into a Zero Trust architecture.
I'm back on mute, sorry. Thank you very much, Brandon, for that. Sean, let me go to you because you have a big role there at CISA. You guys are doing a lot, in terms of working with others, OMB, NIST, and supporting Zero Trust initiatives. Talk to us a little bit about CISA's role. And in our prep call, you had some interesting things to say about modernization and a couple other things. Sean, please talk to us a little bit about CISA's role with the civilian part of this.
Sure. So in terms of timing, there's a lot going on. OMB's released a number of memos that sort of support or walk that journey towards zero trust. GSA, their enterprise infrastructure solution acquisition vehicle, starts to have elements inside of it. We've also mentioned NIST already, some of the activity they're working on. They've had their special pod I mentioned before. I know they're going to start looking at trying to do some lab work around itself at some point. From the Federal CIO Council, Federal CISO Council, there's a steering group that the civilian agencies support, and also I think DOD's in there also. We're just discussing internally what some of the agencies are starting to position towards zero trust. Then you have some external entities like ACT, of course. They've had their white paper that came out a couple years ago that really started a lot of discussions around .gov. So aside from those, and CISA internally, it's generated a lot of discussion terms, okay, as agencies start to move toward a zero trust environment, what does that do for ourselves, for our visibility? Originally with CISA, one of our primary methods of gaining situational awareness, which is one of our primary missions from the agency, was having these sensors that were deployed to agencies' networks. Well, as we move towards zero trust, and as zero trust starts to rely less on networks and you almost abstract the networks away, what is that for CISA to start thinking about in terms of gaining visibility in new ways? And so through a couple of our primary programs, the CDM, Continued Diagnostic and Mitigation Program, the NCPS, the Einstein Sensors, we're also looking at internally, again, how to start acquiring data in new ways in this new environment.
Yeah, Sean, thanks so very much for that. And I'm going to keep going our round robin here, but be sure I'm going to come back to you because very interested in how you guys partner with industry in that way. So, Renata, I want to come to you really quickly here to talk about a few things. And as the CTO there at Marine Corps and Cyber Command, as a direct report to the commander, talk to us a little bit about just more for cyber and you working with the broader Cyber Command community.
Thanks. That's a great question. Being a direct report to the commander is probably one of the most intimidating things I've ever had to do in my career. It's difficult to get in, some of the smartest minds' heads, and having a major general who's worked with administration as well as externally throughout the Marine Corps and Cyber Command. That's a lot of experience to try to keep up with. So I think the largest piece for Marfor Cyber that is important to understand is that while working alongside of Cyber Command, there's an OCO mission, offensive cyber as well as defensive cyber. So you're defending, you're trying to respond to intrusions, and while you're responding, protect, right? So you can try and keep the bad guy out across your network, moving laterally and bilaterally. And then there's that responsibility, what I like to refer to as the responsibility to the service. So we still have Marines that are aboard ships, they're deployed, they're with MUs, and then they're also internally stateside within the United States. So very geographically dispersed, and they're all trying to access the network for multiple different capabilities, whether that's for war fighting, Sean mentioned censoring, whether that is for, placing or what we call pre-positioning as we prepare for close with contact. So understanding the war fighting and then the business operations of technology is what my job is from a cybersecurity perspective. It's a great adventure, but as we have, been accustomed to a distributed workforce from a warfighter's perspective, the actual business operations that we kind of use to mix in for is probably the largest challenge, and it's unprecedented for the Marine Corps and our sister services. So the zero trust, of course, you would probably not anticipate is very attractive to us, but it's cyber as well. So because of some of the experiences we've had throughout not only the DOD, you look at the OPM breach, you look at the Equifax breach. My time at Treasury was very important because a lot of the authentication comes from our credit reports and information only we as a person should know. So when you look at that piece, and then you also think about now we have to look at the FCC and regulations of Wi-Fi connections that everyone is using now because they're home. So I don't want to violate privacy. I don't want to impede on people's civil liberties, but I'm also trying to help the workforce understand this is the best way we can secure the information you're accessing. So a great complex problem that I think Zero Trust as an architecture is going to help solve. But the evolution of Zero Trust, I think, is going to be what keeps us most busy and keeps us, I would say, continuing the emphasis of partnering with industry and each other from a joint perspective.
What a great answer. Super thorough there. Like all the others, I got other questions I have for you to come back to with many of the things you said there. A little hint, very curious how, you working with Chris and his shop and how you guys sort of distinguish what's going on there, because you're so closely related as it relates to the armed forces, the branches. And with that, Chris, I want to come to you. You're Navy's first Chief Information Security Officer. I want you to talk about that a little bit and the significance of that, right? But also, as the Navy shifts to Zero Trust mindset, how are you dealing with that, with the COVID-related teleworking that's going on?
I'll start with the first one, right? So as the first CISO, trust me, this has been an interesting first year on the job based on a lot of environments already having established pretty sophisticated practices and matured over the last 10 years that we would call quote unquote cyber. I really see the job as the CISO at the Don level is not as much looking down and in. Renata sort of nailed it with her answer, what Mar 4 Cyber is doing, and the Lieutenant General Reynolds on the Marine Corps side, General or Admiral Myers over at Fleet Cyber, the new Fleet Cyber Commander, and Vice Admiral, oh my God, I'm having a senior moment. So we just had changeover at N2, N6. But the point is, it's more about the CISO trying to convince the rest of the Navy why this is important. It's not necessarily convincing this audience. We all know why it's important. We all know why we need to invest in the tools and the products. But as you know, as the services have their own warfighting responsibilities, there are many large dollar items that take away sometimes for us to adequately sort of to resource and run all these networks. In some, and bring it into more of the warfighting community. The second part of your question, as far as COVID, COVID has been a blessing and a curse all at the same time. It never let a good crisis go to waste. It's really driven us to adopt and focus in on what we need to do in regards to Zero Trust, probably faster than they would have without COVID being here. Again, I'm just going to paraphrase on some of the things that Renata said. The fact that we pushed most of our workforce into their homes, how we had to secure that environment and enable those people to collaborate in a way that arguably, maybe from a commercial standpoint, having been my last world before I came back into the Department of the Navy, we did accept a good deal of risk in creating this environment, and operational commanders had to sort of push that I believe button, acknowledging that this wasn't perfect, but we had to get the workforce working again. So in doing so, we accepted some risk, but it really drove this zero architecture construct. Brigadier General Stanton over at US Cybercom, who was sort of the lead champion, I would call him kind of one of the lead rah-rah guys behind all this to really drive this and, release the plan order that all the services have figured out how to, respond to in different ways. Everybody did a little bit differently. Navy had one way, Marine Corps had one way, Army and Air Force, had similar ways, but we're all trying to get after this zero trust construct. And, really the Navy has some interesting individual ideas on this, but how do we really get a center of gravity going where we're not all necessarily chasing our own solutions? There has to be some commonality in all of this. So, we're very supportive of what DIS is doing, what Cybercom is driving. And then as all the services sort of come up with their initial ways of how to do zero trust with their own use cases they've come into, I think we're going to find some very interesting areas of overlap where we can all agree that maybe this is the best way. And then there's cost savings. We get the larger purchasing agreements with the particular vendors we want to work with. And again, not let a good crisis go to waste. COVID has really driven this story very quickly. And I actually think we're having a lot of successes in this space. we haven't stumbled over ourselves. As a matter of fact, I think there's a little bit of a victory lap that the Department of Defense might be able to make, because we did get, quote unquote, millions of people teleworking in a relatively short time frame, all things considered. So, kudos to us.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think, as the saying go, assassin is the mother of invention. I think that's how it goes. You get my point. But to your point, Chris, in terms of this crisis, never let a good crisis go to waste, it's really forced us to be innovative in how we let people have accessibility and be secure. And with that, Patrick, I want to come to you here to round out this first round for us. You're really at the tip of the spear for the Army's roll out of Zero Trust. Talk to us a little bit about NetCom and how you've tested the use of sort of cloud-based Zero Trust environment for boosting security.
Yeah, thanks. We've been exploring Zero Trust, working on a strategy. Started in mid FY19 and went into FY20, and then COVID hit. And when COVID hit us, of course, the entire Army workforce, or the majority of it, started to work remotely. And so right away, we had to organize ourselves, NetCom did, into really 4 lines of effort. One, of course, was to protect the force. We have 15,000 people that are out there supporting every day. We had to protect them, come up with those processes, procedures. We had to sustain and enhance existing COVID C4IM support capabilities that we had, the old standbys, GVS, DCS, stuff that we've always used, VTC, telephone bridges, those kind of things, the network itself, VPNs, old technology, old stuff. We had to make sure that could quickly expand to support the remote workforce. We had to advertise COVID C4IM support capabilities. That was our 3rd line of effort, because a lot of organizations didn't know what was available to them to use right away. What are the rules? How can you use zoom.gov? All those kind of things. And then, of course, the last one was to identify and prioritize and fulfill COVID C4IM support, COVID operations C4IM support gaps. And that last line of effort really took off. It took off in that we quickly realized that what our end state should be for the Army's network is a network that allows you to access data and applications from any device and anywhere. That's really the end state of the Army network. Well, to do that, that's Zero Trust, right? That's all about Zero Trust. So our work on our strategy for Zero Trust quickly became implement. And so, of course, we can't implement everything right away, because we are a perimeter security-based network. And so you can't just divest in that perimeter security that we've invested in for a very long time and then just go Zero Trust. You've got to come up with a plan that you can slowly divest in your perimeter security as you build up your Zero Trust capabilities. So one thing that we're doing to kind of bring out some of the Zero Trust goodness is we've partnered with Zscaler, which is one of the sponsors for the event. So I'm glad to see that. And we're doing a proof of concept into our Office 365 Impact Level 5 private cloud that we're standing up at the same time on how to access those resources from non-government furnished equipment and government furnished equipment that's not connected directly to the network via a VPN. So Zero Trust Slack, I'd say that would fit into a resource portal-based deployment model in accordance with the new NIST guide, which I'm a huge fan of. That's really helping us kind of define, where we want to go. But that's just one small part of, we think, maybe a future Zero Trust architecture, that we do have a security data stack in the cloud that handles and that part of our requirement. There's a lot of other parts that we're going to have to build. And as the gentleman said in the beginning, and as the NIST guide states, Zero Trust is a journey. And so we're just beginning that journey. And lastly, I would just say that our big goal for FY21 is, number one, solidify our Zero Trust architecture end state with CIO G6. And we have some great partners up at DA G6 and CIO helping us do that. And then for NetCom and Army Cyber, to take that architecture and devise our long-term implementation plan on how are we going to take down this perimeter security architecture that we've built over the decades and stand up this new zero trust architecture. So we're pretty excited about zero trust, as you can tell, and looking forward to the future. Over.
Yeah, you got a lot going on, Chris. Patrick, sorry. You got a lot going on, man. That's some really good stuff. And let me encourage everyone listening to us. I see some questions coming in, which is really great, and some shout outs actually to some of our panelists. If you have a particular panelist that you want to answer a question, please put his or her name in there so we can see. But being that, let me pick up, Sean, with you and CISA. I'm going to come back to you real quick in terms of the challenges, and you touched on it a bit, but I want you to expand upon it. What challenges will federal agencies face in acquiring zero trust solutions, and how is CISA preparing to support them, right? It's about getting wins. And so how is CISA able to support federal agencies as they're looking to acquire zero trust solutions?
Sure. So if you look at that telework surge that we've been talking about, some of the numbers we've heard, DHS was able to move from 10,000 remote workers a day to well over 50,000. Another agency, they had over 900% increase in their collaboration platform, almost 250% increase in their workplace as a service. I know GSA said they went pretty much 100% telework. So there is this massive quick surge, as Chris was talking about earlier. And so part of the way that I mentioned before in terms of timing, there's been a number of documents that have come out recently. Some of them just happened to be timed before the pandemic. Internally to CISA, we have a number of documents that we've released. There's a telework kit essentially now that is a complement or sort of establishes from a high level for organizations what they can do to support their telework to their organizations. Ourselves, to the TIC program itself, when the telework surge happened in late March, we were hearing from agencies and vendors that they needed some guidance pretty quickly that supported this new model through TIC 3. So within just a few weeks, we released our interim telework guidance, and it really captured and said, it gave some high-level guidance to the agencies, explaining what they can consider, some of the risks, some of the assumptions and constraints to understand as they start to move toward zero trust. The guidance itself, it's still supported traditional remote users, if you will, going through a VPN, and then also start to move toward users that may be going through a remote desktop or some type of virtual desktop, and then all the way towards a zero trust. So the guidance itself was very flexible to the agencies and gave them a number of options of what to do to support their model going forward. But I think, to your point, Calvin, you're starting to see now agencies, as they've got past that initial surge of telework, now they're starting to have those conversations. Okay, as we start to look at this as a viable option going forward, how do we want to bring zero trust into it and make that part of our standard architecture?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think in the very beginning, right, I think government, federal, state, local organizations were looking at accessibility when this thing first started, as opposed to security and zero trust. But I think folks are catching up with it for sure. Let me ask you a question here. Brandon, I'm going to address this to you. I think most appropriate to you. Mark sent it to all panelists. I think this is a good one. I did it as a pilot project, and I think it was either Patrick or Chris, forgive me, one of them mentioned this Zscaler for zero trust, but this is from the outside in, focusing on the user. What are you doing about a pilot for monitoring the app-to-app traffic? Brandon, is that something you can tackle for us, that question?
Yeah, I'll kind of tackle it two different ways. So from the pilots, the zero trust pilots that have been discussed here. So from a DISA perspective, we're tracking several. And a lot of these are focused around the immediate stand-up of CVR being an IL2 environment, and then looking at how we get to an IL5 collaboration environment. And so we have basically different efforts going on across the department. So Marine Corps looking at one option, Navy looking at another option, Air Force, Army NetCom, and the Army Corps of Engineers all doing different options. And so from our perspective, under Cyber Command's leadership, all those different efforts are helping us inform how we want to move forward with this, and how an internet-based user can access an IL5 infrastructure and data. And so that's the primary focus, and something from a zero trust reference architecture perspective that we had to pivot kind of in response as well, where we were mostly doing this from developing the reference architecture, more of a paper-based drill, and with augmentation of a lab with representative capabilities. So again, from a reference architecture perspective, we're not going to say you should use vendor X or vendor Y, but generally speaking, a capability set. So what we're trying to do is capture evaluation criteria and lessons learned from these various pilots for how we can do variations of what's called Flow 3, or how you would access a IL5 cloud environment from the commercial internet. And so part of that, I think, is also changing the focus on its head, coming from the mobility space that I was previously in, where I think we've all kind of talked and looked at BYOD, or bring your own approved device. That was really always kind of a nice to have, and has really thrust that into really becoming a requirement. As far as the app-to-app pilots, so there we do have another effort within my portfolio called Software-Defined Enterprise. We're looking at data segmentation and micro-segmentation, both at the data and network layers. So we do have that effort. That's more of an internal effort from a DISA perspective. But at least from a zero trust perspective, across the pillars, obviously data protection and network segmentation are key pillars of the zero trust architecture.
Wow. Thank you very much, Brandon. Really appreciate that. Renata, I'm going to come to you. I warned you that we're going to be talking about, so I'm going to bring us up just a bit. Everybody is so thorough in their very technical answers and getting down in the weeds. I'm going to bring us up a little bit, 30,000 feet. You're working with Chris in particular in the Navy, and how close Marine Corps and Navy are. How do you distinguish those roles, though, and how do you interact with each other? And, you know, is there a level of cooperation that we don't see that's behind closed doors? Like, talk to us a little bit about that. I find that very interesting, because everybody's talking about partnerships, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, great partnerships, but who's coordinating the partnerships, and how do you know you're getting the most efficiency and effectiveness out of those partnerships? I know it's a rambling question, but can you make any sense out of that?
Absolutely. You know, I think the best thing that Marine Corps did was took a look at its structure and found out they had a lot of deputy commandants of a lot of spaces. They didn't have a deputy commandant of information. And, you know, General Reynolds is the first one I've been exposed to. There were, I think, 2 to 3 prior. I'm sure someone will correct me, but she's the first one I was exposed to. And I think that her being in that space, or Marine Corps just having a deputy commandant of information, at the same time, this Department of Navy CISO gets put in place, and then the CIO role. I think all of that occurring at the times that it did, having the deputy commandant of information there as not only an advocate, that's what you hear industry say, oh, she, you know, that person is advocating on behalf of the Marine Corps. But as a communicator, she does definitely have a background in technology and the information environment, and a thorough understanding of both Navy and Marine Corps. So I think I can honestly answer your question by saying that because we have such a thorough amount of leaders who understand both spaces, it's occurring natural, the coordination that occurs, the deliberate approach that we take when we loop people in on emails, putting people on the CC line, being in a structured environment and rank and file. Sometimes there's some hesitancy of putting the 3-star on, you know, an email. But what I will say is the ability to communicate openly across with the Don CIO, Mr. Wise, is not in a afterthought in any of this. So he has a major role, and what I've seen has occurred naturally. Now, if it's happening in the background where it's harsh and it's hard, I don't see that, and I don't experience that. I see all of us working together. We all talk to each other just like we're doing today. We converse a lot. So I think it's happening naturally, and it's probably not just personality driven, but it's also, I think it's mission focused, and we all check our egos at the door, and we want to move the entire institution forward. And I think that I see that in a lot of leaders. And I know you didn't ask me to do this, but I'd ask Chris on his perspective, because that's Ms. Fink's perspective. I'm all the way up here at Fort Meade. I'm not in the building. I'm getting emails and I'm on a lot of phone calls, but I'm not in the room, and we know how important that space is, just being able to glean from that. So I'd like Chris to give his input.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to, yeah, if Kelvin, if you're probably coming to me anyway, so I'm happy to jump on.
Exactly.
So like any good family, right? You got your crazy uncles and, there's things, but the Marine Corps in particular, and I'm actually going to gloat on the Marine Corps for a minute. The Marine Corps seems to be like, you hear that, the analogy, the Earth is a Goldilocks planet, it's in the right place to survive. Like the Marine Corps is like the Goldilocks service, because it seems to be not too big and not too small. Like they really have their act together, particularly with their view of the mix-send, and something they've been working on very diligently for a long time. They've got their command and control in place. And and maybe it's a function of scale. The Marine Corps is not as big as the Army or the Air Force or the Navy, that they really, really do have their act together. So the crazy uncles are maybe more on the Navy side, and nobody get me in trouble for saying that, because the Navy's a much larger organization. There's many more opinions. There's 5 syscoms, and the PEOs and PMWs, and working with Fleet Cyber, and so there's a maturing that's coming on the Navy side for this. But we are all kind of in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. It's been challenging for the Don to stand up in the past year. We've had a lot of changes in leadership. I think we're in our 4th Secretary of the Navy since we've been in this job. So it's been, there's been things there's been fits and starts, and again, COVID, right? So as the Don CIO office stood up, as we were getting into our stride, 3 months into it, we dealt with COVID. So just even coordinating a lot of the messaging. Mr. Weiss was very, very successful in working with DOD to make sure that the Navy in particular Navy and Marine Corps had the funding they need to do, to get COVID, our Office 365 environments up and running. But it's been interesting. I see General Reynolds many times a week. She's one of my favorite people in the building. Having come from MAR4 Cyber into the DCI role, I completely agree with what Renata said. She's bringing a lot of that leadership and vision. It's a continuity of effort, right? You're coming from sort of the operational side right into the Pentagon to ensure that she can do the resourcing, and higher level direction, working with the Commandant to ensure the Marine Corps is meeting its goals. Again, in the Navy, Admiral Trussler was the name I was struggling with before, the new N2N6. There's some growing pains, but I think it's a continuity, it's a scale issue. And I'm sure Patrick would probably reference the Army is probably no different. I know the Marine Corps has or actually the Air Force has some issues as it comes to, again, scale of their organizations. But zero trust as a construct, again, this has been said already, right? It's not, zero trust is not a thing that you go buy in a box. And this is what I would go back to the vendor community with, having come from there as well. There's a lot of vendors that say, well, we do zero trust, or a component of zero trust. You might do help us with the situation awareness, or again, what Zscaler does with pushing stuff out there. But identity is the real anchor point in all of this. And as we're working a zero trust and identity strategy at the same time, and they're tremendously dependent on each other. So for instance, I'll give you a little C story within the Navy. We're pushing identity very, very hard because it's helping us remediate audit findings in our financial systems. And there's this big push from the DOD level to ensure we're getting identity systems pushed out, because it's making a lot of our audit pain go away. Well, we need identity for lots of reasons. And what I want to say is the byproduct of a proper identity solution rolled out is you get to zero trust, is you remediate NFRs and material weaknesses and audit findings. It's not it shouldn't be the reason we're doing identity. It should be the byproduct of identity with a properly architected system. And as Brandon points out, and I know Patrick lives this probably every day, as our environments get more and more complicated, particularly when you introduce critical infrastructure and weapon systems and logistics and all that other stuff, this perimeter defense mentality we found is really wanting once we had to push our entire workforce out of the perimeter. So that was the whole idea for our workforce to continue to come in through, JRS stacks and, internet access points and cloud access points. We started choking on that just from a throughput. Now we eventually put capacity in place to to augment it and make it less painful, but it still brought to the question that if I'm going to have my entire workforce working from home, there's got to be a better way. And I'll say one of the adoption things is I am talking to you now on my home personal Macintosh 27-inch screen, and I've got my NMCI computer over here. Some of the adoption efforts has been certain people in the workforce, well, I don't want to put CVR on my home computer because you're going to, I'm going to do something and you're going to come in and you're going to take my computer away from me because NCIS is going to show up at my door. All right, guys, you gotta put some of that. You also, the user has to push the believe button that we're setting an environment where I'm not going to get into your personal privacy or be intrusive into your home operations because, my government issued laptop doesn't have all the features and functionalities that my home computer does. So there's that as well. But I would say overall, the zero trust thing with all the things I just said is really moving at a nice clip.
Well, so many questions from that. Thank you so very much. From the BYOD, we could have another discussion just on that, right? Really appreciate that. And Patrick, I am going to pivot to you because, with, certainly the partnership, Navy and Marine Corps, and they really working really well together. Let me pivot to you because as I see technology, right? 3 categories: products, processes, and people. Who do you have to work with, Patrick? Again, 30,000-foot question to sort of distinguish roles and responsibilities from the Army's point of view, because as Chris pointed out, a lot of this is logistics and hardware and other things you have to deal with. Who does the Army have to work with in that way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So of course the big one is DISA, so because we're connecting to the DODIN, so we're partnering very well with DISA and a lot of the key elements in all of our initiatives to include all of our activity with Zero Trust. We're partnered with DISA on a BYOD proof of concept that we hopefully will actually go into implementation here at the end of this fiscal year. And then of course we're partnered with DoD CIO heavily on their global identity solution. And then internal to the Army, it is a team of teams, right? So we have our higher headquarters, Army Cyber, and then of course we have all the commands in the Army, 4-star commands, 3-star commands, those CIOs, those G6s. We meet regularly. General Crawford, before he retired, he was the CIO G6. He started what turned into be the Information Enterprise Network Sync meeting, which happens weekly between all the PEOs, CIO G6, NetCom, and Army Cyber, and it's all attended by all senior leaders, and it's a technical sync. We get down into the weeds on where we're going technically to support the warfighter. So that's been a huge help. For us, it really is a big team of teams because from the Army perspective, we've got to clean up a few things before we can get to that end-state Zero Trust architecture. And it's already been mentioned, but ICAM is the big one for us. So we got to clean up our ICAM so we can even use something as good as the new global identity capability that DoD CIO is working on. We've got to clean up our Active Directory. So we have a huge effort this fiscal year on Active Directory restructure for the Army. So we have a much better Active Directory. So that's all those activities are just a big team of teams working together to this end state. Lastly, I would just say that probably the big missing link for us right now is just having that really good, here's where we envision being for that Zero Trust architecture, and here are the steps that we need to take to get there. And this is a long-term kind of plan, hopefully not too long, because it is a journey, but we don't want it to be a long journey. We want it to be a short journey so we can really take advantage of the goodness of Zero Trust.
Patrick, really appreciate that. Again, and I want to apologize to the panelists as well as the audience. Apparently, I'm coming through a little choppy connection on my end. But I will say I'm super interested in those partnerships and those connections because obviously the adversaries, the bad actors, they're partnering. They're connecting, they're collaborating. And so it's really interesting to me how we're doing it on our side. So I appreciate that. Now let me go. We got about a little less than 20 minutes left here. We got a lot of great questions coming in from the audience. Brandon, I'm going to come back to you because here's a question from Tyler. It says, how does DISA plan on transitioning into, and Brandon, you absolutely touched on it a bit, but maybe you can expound just a little bit more. How does DISA plan on transitioning into zero trust architecture framework without truly having environments to test these technologies at scale? No product works the same from a commercial environment to the complex DoD NIPRNet. You want to get that, Brandon?
Yeah, so from a reference architecture perspective, so we are standing up test capabilities within our JITC lab. So that is part of what our strategy here. Our NSA brethren are also building out additional lab capabilities at Dreamport. So they're also looking at the zero trust reference architecture from a NSS or National Security Systems perspective. So it's almost a broader umbrella than just even what we're doing from a DoD perspective. So we're looking at those. I think the operational pilots, especially with what everyone's looking at from a Microsoft 365 environment, I think a lot of those are kicking the tires on those capabilities from a pilot perspective. So again, as I mentioned, some of the evaluation criteria and lessons learned out of those pilots, I think absolutely inform our way forward as well.
Great. Thank you very much. For all the panelists, here's a question that I think we've touched on it just a bit, but I think it's worth touching on again because the National Cybersecurity Alliance, we sponsored a summit yesterday with folks from NASDAQ, and the big topic was AI and machine learning. So I'm going to throw this out to all the panelists. How do you plan for the adoption of emerging technologies as it relates to zero trust, such as AI and 5G? Is that a fair question, Sean? Let me start with you. Is that a fair question for the panelists?
Let me answer for the rest of the panelists if it's fair. Let me answer it from my perspective. We recognize obviously interest both in 5G, Internet of Things, AI and stuff. A lot of this is work that we've been working in the background with GSA, and I mentioned the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions Acquisition Vehicle. And through GSA, they've been priming a lot of their networks and some of their acquisition vehicle to take advantage of 5G and AI. And then internally to CISA, I mentioned before about the increased visibility that we will be gaining, the situational awareness, the feeds from the logs from cloud services or from endpoints. And then we are having our own internal discussions. Okay, how do we take advantage of machine learning? How do we take advantage of AI to inform ourselves and to better pull out the signals from the noise, if you will, in terms of what's going on in terms of the agency's environments?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, for us, it's about industry engagement. And we learn a lot on what's going on and what the future might look like for what's coming out in industry. So meeting with industry partners regularly, and forums like this, having them come out to beautiful Fort Huachuca in Arizona and spend some time with us and share with us what they're working on. We get a lot out of those engagements, and it really kind of shapes, what we could bring to bear to really get after our goals quicker and better.
Hey, Kelvin, I think it's definitely a fair question. Chris hit it on the nail that the Marine Corps is very nimble, a whole lot smaller than our sister services. Had some conversations recently with Director C4, General Malik, and her team with the new Assistant Deputy Commandant of Information, who came from the war room down at in Quantico. And so that's kind of where we look for that emerging technology space. I think there are some plans to try to figure out, is that war room that official emerging technology, and do we use that Chief Technology Officer of the Marine Corps position to address some of those emerging technologies? So I think everyone's kind of thinking, what's that next ridgeline? I'd like to foot stomp a little bit on AI and ML. Mm-hmm. We jump into the technical so fast, and that's what we do. We're subject matter experts. But if you take a look at some of Ms. Spinks's concerns, I'm so glad you asked. My concern is bad data in and bad data out. Mm. So from censoring the networks, this is a new space, and especially for Marine Corps, we have transformed. We tried to modernize, didn't really keep up the pace on that because things were just happening so fast. So it's more of transformation that the MCN is going through, from applications being on premises to migrating to the cloud, whether that's Amazon, whether that's AWS. We've got facilities related control system concerns down at Lawcom that we have to be mindful of down in Albany. So bad data in for me and bad data out is we have to really study and increase our expertise on understanding the data, censoring your networks for data, and then building an infrastructure that can scale, as well as where you put the data, and then how do you actually process the data to feed the machine that's going to learn those behaviors as you start to program those algorithms for those identities. So if Ms. Spinks doesn't have a pattern of behavior of logging in from home because there's something wrong with the initial architecture or the initial ability to gather that data, then how effective is this enablement of zero trust? So just something I like to talk about because we seniors can get in the room very quickly, and we have a lot of, at least for me, I have a lot of action officers that jumps right into, man, let's do data analytics. I want to take this course, and that's all good. It's all great for modernizing the network and transforming the network, et cetera. And even learning, data sciences, as a data scientist discipline becomes more and more prevalent in the Department of Defense as well as the federal government, all for it. But I just want to make sure that, if you're bringing in data that's not as effective as it should be, then we're really going to have a challenge. And to be honest, the adversary is going to have a lot of fun with that.
Really appreciate that follow on. So Chris, I think this is a question appropriate for you because we were talking about BYOD just a little bit, and let me know. Have you looked at a combination of MDM and VMI as the BYOD solution?
So I don't know if we've gotten into specific, at least at the Don level, right? We haven't looked at specifics, right? But of course, the bring your own device is, there's a cultural component of this, right? So if you take, if you look at the composition of what stood up the Don, you have Mr. Weiss, Mr. Galbraith, they both come from industry. They are straight industry, understanding that BYOD is sort of the new normal. The rest of the team, I'm kind of a hybrid. I come from a sort of a cybercom Navy background, industry, and then you got some people in the office that are straight stick government, right? So there's this interesting debate that would go across back and forth where there's lots of us that trust the industry, that trusts, people that are making apps and doing things, that there's a market that's opening up to enable us to be more collaborative, securely outside of our traditional security environments. But then you've got the pendulum swings over to the people who don't trust, that want to control, everything has to be really, I'm not going to use I don't mean micromanage in a negative sense. Mm-hmm. But from a monitoring standpoint, how do we monitor our workforce to ensure that information is not migrating onto devices that we can't monitor, control, which is a real risk, and particularly in the CVR environment, that's a real concern, because when you bring a CVR environment onto your personal machine, I can take a document and pull it off CVR and drop it on my desktop. So that is a concern. But it's one of those things that I think we're going to have to acknowledge that this is the new normal. And how do we work with those things instead of always trying to, control them? What is it? What's the word I'm looking for? Ghost IT or everybody's going to figure out a way to do this once they're outside of their environments. So it's some things we have to trust, some things we have to trust but monitor, and some things we'll control very tightly. And I guess that's a sliding continuum of which things we want to do, which to what. But the BYOD, if we can get everybody trusting on both, that I'm not going to drop an app on your personal phone, that I'm going to monitor all your personal stuff. Conversely, the two phone government, I hate carrying the two phones. I trust the government can do whatever they want on this phone. We're making progress, but it's got to be part of the things we consider moving forward.
I could add on there.
Oh, go ahead.
So from a DISA perspective, I know we're partnered with Army on looking at some of the BYOD capabilities as well. So we've kind of looked, I like to look at it from three lenses, and really this is from at least today where we're so heavily invested in leverage PKI is really how do I authenticate and use applications on those devices. And so kind of the three pillars I look at that from are either I have credentials stored securely on the device, off the device, or I'm using some alternative multi-factor. And so from those three different pillars, you kind of see different BYOD pilots, some of them being a VMI or virtual mobile infrastructure. So think of that like a remote session to a virtual mobile device that would be hosted on-prem. So we're looking at that from both a bring your own device as well as a government furnished multi-class environment, as well as I just need to access what's Outlook web access or other capabilities. Can I use my CAC on a personal machine, or can I get derived credentials issued to it, or can I use an external form factor like a USB token with derived credentials? So those are the three kind of different ways that we're looking at it and supporting that from an enterprise perspective.
You know, oh, go ahead.
Calvin,
Go ahead, John.
No, I want to jump in from the civilian side. So some of the discussions we had, even going back to when the pandemic hit, was some agencies may not have a robust BYOD, policy, but then we started talking to them and they had a pretty strong virtual desktop policy. Mm-hmm. And when we started talking to them, well, what is that virtual desktop on? And the agency say, oh, it was on the user's home computer, just like Chris was talking about a little before. And we started having them realize that BYOD may not just be bringing your phone onto the agency's network. It could also be pushing the agency's network out onto the user's computer itself. And it sort of flipped some mentalities in terms of internally to some of the agencies about what that BYOD means. Maybe it's more BYON, bring your own network. I think that changes the perspective a little bit about what the dependencies are now. And I think one of the challenges is, as we recognize, some of the clients and the phones themselves, they're becoming more ephemeral, right? So as you start to talk to agencies and they start to talk about what's the firmware on that phone or what's the OS, it may not matter, especially towards zero trust. It really, the network is suspect. You're starting to see also where the endpoints themselves are suspect. It's more about the apps themselves, the data and the users. It's not as much about the GFE sometimes.
The only fault I can find with this panel session so far is it's probably too short. We could go on for a little bit longer talking about this stuff. We've got about 5 more minutes, and I want the panelists to think about them and give each of you an opportunity to close out with some final thoughts. And as you think about that, just want to let the audience know that we've really had a great time with you here today. And I'll quote the great Wayne Gretzky, who said, he was great and the best because he wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the strongest, but he wouldn't skate to where the puck was. He would skate to where it was going to be. And I think that's what this panel did today. Just really gave us a glimpse of what we should be doing to really get to that zero trust environment. So with that, panelists, final thoughts as we wrap up here. Brandon, we'll start as we did in the beginning. We'll start with you.
Thank you again, Kelvin. This has been a great panel. So I think I would foot stomp that we're still in the early days of the journey from moving from a network-centric data model or security model, to a data-centric model. So there's a lot of moving pieces that has to come into play there. And one of those fundamental pieces is identity or ICAM, or identity credential access management. And so that's another part of our portfolio that we're heavily working from an enterprise perspective and working with a lot of the service components as well. So again, whether that's user or device identity, those are big things that we're putting significant investments, time and energy into improving, which is a critical enabler for zero trust among many of the other pillars of network and data security.
Really appreciate that, Brandon. Sean.
Sure. From the TIC perspective, I'll just promote that what we're working on with agencies, I mentioned in the beginning, the OMB memo. The OMB memo has new use cases, alternative architectures. We are exploring having a zero trust use case come out. What we'll do is we'll work with the federal CIO and CISO council, vendors, of course, agencies. Agencies will look at positioning pilots that support some of the tenets of zero trust. In the background, ourselves at CISA, GSA, and other stakeholders they'll distill some lessons learned out from what those pilots are. We'll then apply those into a TIC zero trust use case, and then we'll forward that to the Federal CISO Council for adoption across the .gov environment. So I think that's one of the ways we're looking forward to supporting zero trust.
Really, really appreciate that. So, Renata.
Absolutely great panel. I've had a good time listening to the perspectives of different areas outside of the Department of Defense. So I think the diversity of the panel has been awesome. I'm looking forward to the information sharing piece. As we look across all of the architectures and the reference architecture that I know this is going to put in place, and we're going to piggyback off of that. That information sharing space is probably going to be the most critical piece when it comes to defending in this new world we live in. Understanding that space, how to hunt in the cloud. How do you work with vendors to secure the data that's now in their house, right? So I don't know how to go to someone else's house and tell them what they should do with their furniture. So that's going to be very interesting on how we look at that. Everything else I think we've already touched on. It's just the more of exploring and continuing to discover. And like Brandon said, we're in the very early stages. But I'm looking forward to being in the early stages as well as watching this thing evolve and being a part of it from a defense perspective, but as well as industry and the outside, looking into the executive branch, judicial branch, and legislative branches and seeing how they are responding to the TIC and the NIST and the many other guidelines that are going to come out. So I think we got to continue to be a learning organization, always have thirst for more knowledge, and not get stagnated on this is what we said we were going to do, because 90 days later, it's probably going to look different. Thanks.
What a great message. Really appreciate that. In the beginning session, Navy went and then Army. I'm going to switch it in my last session here. Going to let Army go and then Navy. So Patrick.
I'll be quick so Chris has some time. But I mean, the big challenge, of course, is time, right? And what slows us down on all these great new initiatives, BYOD, Zero Trust, improving Active Directory, rolling out an ICANN that can do persona and device identity. All those things are great initiatives. They must happen. But of course, we get slowed by policy and bureaucracy and contracting and all the other things that we all deal with day to day in the government. So how do we overcome that? I think it's teamwork. I think it's open communications. I think it's transparency, so we can help each other out and move the entire ball forward, so that we can get the end state, because our customers, they all want it yesterday. My 1.4 million users on the Army network, they want to be able to access data from any place, anywhere yesterday, not a year from now, not 2 years from now. They want it now. So we've got to move quick to produce those results and give people what they want, so we get better at doing our mission. And of course, for us, the DoD mission, I think, is critical. So that's going to help us move forward. That's all I really have.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Chris.
So Patrick stole all my thunder, actually. That was almost word for word what I was going to say, words to the effect. So I'll say it a little differently. Okay. So my boss, Aaron Weiss, his vision of innovation is not that there's new technologies coming along, but how quickly we can get that technology into an environment, right? That's how we innovate. We adopt it, we bring it out quicker. So we are all about trying to move faster, RMF process, and all the things that go along to, introducing new technology in our environment quicker. I guess my only thing that I think we're all going to be aware of is if we can innovate faster and adopt new technology quicker. I'll use identity as an example. We've been chasing this identity discussion since 2014, and we're still struggling with rolling out, an identity architecture. We've migrated from, perimeter defense to comply to connect, and now we're on to zero trust. In 2 years from now, there's going to be something else. There's going to be a new thing. It's not zero trust. It's going to be whatever the cyber sharks with lasers equivalent is. That will, and then we're going to be chasing yet another construct, because there will always be the next thing. So it's sort of measuring, adopting innovation because look, the government is not an easy thing to work in, and maybe we've come to the conclusion we'll have to skip technologies. right? So we'll move to zero trust, and then there'll be sharks with lasers, and then there'll be something else, and we might have to jump over sharks with lasers and get to the next thing, because it's just the way that we work. We can't always be on the leading edge. As much as we want to be, there's just, as Patrick noted, there's just the government, right? And, turnover and change and different leadership in different directions. So, be patient with us. What I would argue is, as we're identifying this, we are attuned to the fact that we are a slow-moving organization. And, particularly, I think in the Department of the Navy, they're trying to bring people in that can get past some of the bureaucracy and sort of be a little more comfortable pushing the believe button that industry is going to produce products that are inherently built with security in them. So it can be a little more trusting to adopt those things, because it's in industry's best interest to build secure technology. So let's hope that we all can get on this sort of war footing, and then maybe push things like 18-month RMF ATO cycles to the past, where it just doesn't need to take that long in the future. And I think, zero trust is a good example of that. And looking forward to really where we continue this conversation.
Perfect way to close it out, Patrick. Chris, really appreciate that, man, in terms of just how you summed it up. I will say for the audience, you have heard a theme throughout this panel. It's been teamwork, 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 right? Not a highly technical issue, teamwork, but everybody is working together in such a great way. A couple of times I had to mute myself because I was having a sort of hallelujah moment and country boy from Blair, South Carolina, Gethsemane Baptist Church. You tend to, be a very active listener. It's been some great points made here today. And I will tell you, the other thing is that if you judge a panel by the audience, and we can't necessarily see the audience, but the activity in the chat and the Q&A has been it's been really great. One of the most active I've seen thus far. And so I really want to thank the audience for your participation here today. So, thank you all for joining us. So Renata, Sean, Brandon, Chris, Patrick, thank you very much for joining us on the road to zero trust. Russ, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, AFCEA DC. Thank you, Joe and James. What a great panel and what a great discussion. Boy, I tell you, it was really riveting. It's so much of it is reflected in what we see in the commercial space as well. And I think the two takeaways that I had from this was that it's going to be a journey, albeit a quick journey, and that we're going to live in a blended environment for quite some time. But I think that ultimately zero trust architectures are certainly a solid approach to minimize threats and manage access to resources in this hybrid multi-cloud environment that we have today. However, it doesn't mean that we don't have to maintain situational awareness of our networks and the applications that depend on these complex platforms. At NetScout, we deliver solutions that provide the visibility and analytics that you need to ensure secure and successful deployments in any network, any application, anywhere that it may be. That's who we are and what we do. So with that, thank you all for attending AFCEA's DC's virtual event, The Road to Zero Trust. In your chat box, you will see a link for the Networking Room Zoom meeting. Please use that link to join us for virtual networking and discussion. Once you're connected, please turn on your video and audio to participate. Thanks again.